How can we, yes, check the box to be compliant with the regulatory requirement or the insurance requirement or whatnot, but also how can we take that, a little bit of a step further and actually make the environment more hardened, make it more secure?
Technology is transforming how we think, how we lead, and how we win. From InterVision, this is Status Go, the show helping IT leaders move beyond the status quo, master their craft, and propel their IT vision.
Welcome to the first episode of Status Go in 2023. This episode also marks the beginning of our 5th year as a podcast, 190 plus episodes, tens of thousands of downloads. Truly, we are excited to kick off the new year. As our listeners know, one of our traditions on Status Go has been to do a predictions episode in which we interview some of the experts from InterVision to get their thoughts on the year ahead. This year is no exception. Today, we are joined by John Gray, CTO, Alan Jenkins, CISO, Brent Lazarenko, SVP of Innovation and Platform Modernization, and Kevin Van Monfrans, Vice President of Product. John will focus on trends in digital transformation, Alan on cybersecurity, Brent on applications, innovation, and digital engineering, and Kevin on trends in securing the edge. Gentlemen, welcome to Status Go.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Great to be here.
Before we look at 2023, let's take a look back at 2022. What surprised you? Maybe it was a trend that didn't pan out. Maybe it was something unexpected that wasn't even on the radar a year ago. But what surprised you about 2022? Hey, KVM, let's start with you.
I think in 2022, I thought we'd hit our peak with things like ransomware, and the the continued attacks, the continued interest in protecting yourself against ransomware is absolutely something that surprised me. It continues to grow, and it's putting everybody at the edge at risk.
Brent, how about you?
Yeah, from the innovation side of the house and the application and data side, I think the biggest surprise for everybody was the crazy swings that we see in Web3 adoption and then unadoption, and then rethinking of what Web3 means, and in particular, how the blockchain technologies may apply to the future, in particular data structures and application development. Um, that was probably one of the biggest shocks to me was how that really went through a whole bunch of few cycles in 1 year.
Yeah, it does. It did seem like it was really ping ponging. Alan, how about you?
Yeah, so one of the things I think surprised a lot of people was actually that there was a dip in ransomware attacks early in the year. And I think the thing that we couldn't see coming was all of the issues that are happening over in Ukraine. And so a lot of the bad guys, specifically some of the folks from like the R Evil and the Conti groups, which are some of the most prevalent ransomware developers and groups, uh, their workforces got diverted in other ways because of things that were happening around the globe. So we saw a dip initially in ransomware, which was a good thing, but it wasn't expected. Unfortunately, we're seeing all that change and we're seeing those numbers go back up now. So,
Yeah.
we're really hoping that people don't get a false sense of security based on that happening.
Yeah, I know. I talked to a lot of CIOs back in the early days of the Russian Ukraine war, and they were concerned about a spike at that time. So I think it caught a lot of people off guard. But yeah, it's unfortunate that it's bouncing back up again.
Yeah.
John, what are you seeing in 2022 that surprised you?
Well, I'll keep the security vein going here. Something that I've been looking at for probably close to a decade and expecting is really the sort of mainstreaming of cyber insurance, right? That insurance companies we're going to start to really require full-on cyber insurance, and we're now starting to see that big time. Alan has visibility into this with some of the carriers he works with, but if you look at some of the policies they're now drafting, they look like the NIST security framework. I mean,
Yeah.
and they're requiring very specific technologies in some cases that they've completely over-rotated. And I think it's gonna be a real burden on companies here for a while as that kind of
Yeah.
norms somewhat. But yeah, that truly accelerated this year, I think. So yeah, it caught me because it had been very slow coming. Been
Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
for years
Well,
about
and I know Alan KVM and I were at an event in St. Louis last week, and that was one of the things that came up from the audience. There was about the cyber insurance and the change in stance that many of the insurance companies
yeah.
have.
You you
Well,
can't
let's pivot now to 2023. And John, the talk for several years has been on digital transformation. But what should the CIO or the IT leader really be focused on for 2023 related to digital transformation?
I mean, I think it's more evolutionary at this point than revolutionary. I think COVID's helped sort of push everybody into a more digital world. And I mean, for digital transformation really to take hold, you've got to have policies in place. If in certain organizations, right, that allow processes and things to be fully digital. You got to have the processes. You got to have people. You got to have technology. We've certainly got the technology now, and I think there's increasing acceptance of processes being entirely digital. I mean, I leased a new truck for my son, and all the paperwork was DocuSign, and the guy at the dealership, this old school dealership, gave me a thumb drive. I'm like, come on, where's 40 pages of paperwork? Nice, it's
Yeah.
all on YouTube. So I think there's increasing acceptance of truly digital technology, which I think it's really going to unlock the ability for organizations to kind of come back around and not, repave the cow path by automating
Yeah.
clunky manual processes. And this is really, I think, probably what Braden's going to talk about more is app modernization, is breaking up the siloed monolithic applications into microservices and serverless, and then really, approaching business processes differently. We're no longer working the 8-hour workday. Well, why do we have to get paid every 2 weeks? I mean, you're working every day, because you have money going into your bank every day, right? Some of these things
That's an interesting concept.
given, I think some of the long-standing processes in business, supply chain, so where you take credit from your suppliers and all of that sort of thing, are truly going to start to become a lot more fluid, and it's going to open up completely different models, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
I love the imagery about paving over the cow path. That's great imagery. Hey, KVM, while we're kind of on this topic of digital transformation, I know your focus for the last several months and then on into 2023 has been about securing the edge. What things are we going to see related to securing the edge as we move forward next year?
Yeah. Now I look at the edge as, the workers themselves, but also the office spaces and how we're using them. And I think in what we saw in 2022 was, kind of a lot of different things. We have companies asking employees to go back to work, like Twitter with mandates.
Mm-hmm.
We're also seeing other companies that are downsizing their space, repurposing their space, and then turning them into kind of a completely different employee experience. Regardless of what's happening in these spaces, and you need to take this into account, what it is it's changing the way that we secure the worker. And we also have to be very conscious with that worker experience. We can throw a lot of security at a worker, but we can also change their user experience, how they interact with their applications, how they get access to data, what it takes to, kind of navigate their company's landscape. And so I think as we kind of look into 2023, we definitely saw the pandemic push people out of the office, and people had to respond. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of those short-term responses were going back to the well on existing topologies, existing technologies, um, and it also forced the vendors to say, "Hey, this is a real thing, and we need to do a better job in delivering how we package this up." So on the secure service edge, this is going to be a combination of how you embrace workers coming back into the office, whether it's just for collaboration, or today I'm going into the office for a holiday lunch, and I'm going to probably spend 4 or 5 hours there, but I need to be productive in those 4 or 5 hours, and then I'm going to come back to my home and finish my work.
Mm-hmm.
It includes going to the office and securing them, but also how do you have a seamless experience when I'm outside of the office? And so, in 2023, I think this is the year that you need to get a plan around the visibility of these hybrid workers. You need to have a plan around further securing that environment, because this is the entry point for things like ransomware. It's the entry point for
Mm-hmm.
a lot of different areas. And the vendors themselves have made this so much more accessible, so much more manageable, and it's kind of time to look at it. One more fact I'll throw out there: the vendors are also trying to take existing tools and add capabilities to them. And so I would also urge our listeners to think about, maybe I have some new technologies in the suite that I have not yet unlocked.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
you need to take a look at that and determine whether you have some capabilities. Do you need to acquire some capabilities? But it's time to relook at the edge again,
Mm-hmm.
because the market has really unlocked some capabilities to have much more visibility and better security and an improved user experience.
Yeah, I think that remote work really opened eyes to uh, where is the edge, and how do you secure that. And I want to come back to that here in a minute, KVM. But Brent, I want to jump to you. You focus on a pretty wide area when you consider applications, innovation, digital engineering. What are some things that our listeners need to be paying attention to in 2023 from that focus?
Yeah, thanks. I think John Gray hit on it. Digital transformation is getting more mature, and with that maturation in the cloud, people are wondering, how do I optimize my cloud, and how do I better use effectively all the services in it. And so this move from lift and shift to what is happening now, which is repurpose and refactor, will dominate. I don't think just 2023, but probably the years to come. And so that lift and shift enables futuristic, what we'll call enterprise architectures of data and platform, that bring these monolithic applications, which enable um, better business outcomes. Outcomes around the ability to create super apps where applications can get created, and have single entry points for a client's customers, data, employees, the concept of portals, but it disseminates down, and these microservices enable that. Um, it's going to be enabling what platform adoption. So the concepts of making it easier for your employees to code by giving them common tool sets in these platforms, by giving them common data sets to use, and making it almost drag and drop. To the point where I see in 2023 potentially, it's already starting to happen, adaptive coding, meaning AI will start taking the degrees of the code and doing a lot of this code generation for companies, with a little bit of oversight from human intervention. And so this is kind of some of the innovative thinking that's happening within the platform modernization space. I think that in combination on the data side, obviously data analytics and predictive AI is also maturing. It's moving from concepts of being reactive, where clients just gather data and look at it, to them being reactive, and in some cases being proactive, meaning that they're using their data and they're generating outcomes, before they're seeing outcomes happen to them. And so that paradigm shift and that maturation, I think, is accelerating in 2023. I think those are some of the three big ones I see
Yeah.
happening. Yeah.
I love that concept of adaptive coding, and brings to mind shadow IT in some ways. And Would love to come back to that here in a second, but I want to jump over to Alan. And Alan, we started off this show by talking a lot about ransomware and cybersecurity. What are some of the trends that you think our listeners need to be aware of in 2023?
Well, I think we just heard one of the new attack vectors is we're going to have car dealers giving USB sticks to people. Uh, John, I'm a little concerned about that, but we can talk about that offline maybe. I think a lot of this has been said, but we're seeing because of so many bad things happening and because of the costs and the impacts of those things, we're really seeing more and more emphasis on things from the governance or the oversight point of view. And I don't think that's going to slow down. And that's coming both from government entities. I mean, one of the biggies now is the New York Department of Financial Services has a set of cyber requirements that are probably going to leak out into a lot of other states and federal mandates. Uh, and also, I think somebody already mentioned it here, is insurance requirements. Uh, some people look at these things like they're bad, and they certainly can be onerous. But the intent of all these things is really to help build a better defensive strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really critical for organizations to understand that and to look at that through the right lens. And so, one of the things that we try to do when we look at these sorts of things is look at, well, how can we, yes, check the box to be compliant with the regulatory requirement or the insurance requirement or whatnot, but also how can we take that, a little bit of a step further and
Mm-hmm.
actually make the environment more hardened, make it more secure. So I think that the big thing that I see is this isn't going to slow down. Meaning the threat actors, they're making a good amount of money, so there's no
Yep.
incentive for them to stop. And so the oversight has to go along with it, and that's not going to slow down either. So really, adjusting to that and adopting those things, but using them for good, I think is going to be really important.
Yeah, I think there was a report that was referenced last week at that event I referenced that someone can make $600,000 a year by launching ransomware attacks. That's a pretty good living in
Yep.
any economy. Well, KVM, I want to jump back to you because the other thing that I know that you and I've talked some about is the concept of zero trust architecture. How does that fit into the work that you're doing on securing the edge?
Yeah, so it's right in line with securing the edge. A lot of people do know this, but the idea is, you know, um, you don't have trust until you establish it, right? And maybe that's not exactly how Gartner would explain it, but it fits perfectly in. So rather than, and let me use an analogy, rather than getting the key to the building and then having free access throughout the building, zero trust is now saying you have access to these rooms. This room may be where you do work. This room is where you do something else. Think about it as applications. And so it's much more granular in that, but it also can be a lot more seamless in the way that you get to it. So, zero trust is absolutely a core concept. It takes a little bit of a different thinking versus VPNs,
Mm-hmm.
but absolutely uh, going to be the way of the future, and it creates that experience that I'm not worried about the location that I'm going to. I'm worried about the application that I'm getting access to. So the experience, whether that application's in your data center or out there in the cloud, it'll be a common experience.
And the that goes all the way through to the data that I'm accessing when I'm in or out of the office as well, right?
That's correct. That's
Yeah,
correct.
yeah. John, I want to come back to you on digital transformation and talk about the importance for businesses to look at digital transformation. I love the analogy used about paving the same old cow path. What you're really saying is it's a mindset change, right?
Yep.
To really do digital transformation well. How do you guide customers or prospects into understanding this mindset shift that you have for transformation?
Yeah, I think, the way I look at it is if you look at what the objectives a business is trying to achieve, around obviously profit and growing affiliation with their customers, whoever they are, and then if you look at the customers and what are they trying to do when they interact with a business, they want it to be very streamlined. They want to be able to do it in the middle of the night, and those sort of things. I mean, you sort of think of banking as one of the original online banking as one of the original sort of areas where things change dramatically. Yeah, there are real win-win scenarios there, right, for organizations where you can completely virtualize a process that previously somebody had to come into a bank or call up and you had to have somebody answer the phone and enter data. You no longer have to do that. People go online and do it themselves. They're happy to do it. They're doing it in the middle of the night. Therefore, your customer's happier and you've completely eliminated a manual process, right? So there are places where businesses can kind of reshape themselves to their benefit, right? And bring their cost point down and get ahead of their competitors because they're using streamlined processes, they're using technology. And, Brent hit on this. If you can really break up the applications, because quite often the large monolithic applications don't lend themselves to that sort of, one at a time processing. A lot of older style processing was batch. You did it overnight, particularly financial. You sort of heard, a million records through a process at a time, right? Breaking that down so you can do them one at a time, any time of the day. That's a radically different architecture from an application standpoint. But that's what's happening. And if you can do that, now you can compose business processes that completely fit with what your clients want, who are increasingly millennials and people who they think about things entirely differently, and are much more open to doing things online, not having paperwork, all of this. And so I think if you sort of step back and you look at what you're trying to achieve as a business, what your customers want, there's sort of low hanging fruit in certain areas that are going to be a win-win, right? And then put your money there, and you get adoption, you get increased affiliation, right, with your customer base, and then that funds additional things. If you keep reinvesting, not just treat it as, if you don't just treat technology and apps as a project, we got to do this for a year and then it's over. It's an ongoing investment, right? Technology is an ongoing investment for companies, and that's the different mindset, right? It should be enabling to your organization, not constraining, right? And therefore, you need to continue to feed it.
Alan, that brings to mind a topic that you and I have talked about before, and I wanted to maybe put you on the spot a little bit here. We've talked about continuous pen testing, right? That's an innovation that's come to cybersecurity of recent years. In that sliver of cybersecurity of pen testing. But as John is talking about digital transformation in this continuous cycle, what other things in cybersecurity might lend itself to this continuous process of making sure that you're not just checking the box, but you're secure? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's a really good question, and I think one of the things that you mentioned it earlier, Kevin talked a little bit about it, is this zero trust concept. I think that continues to be an important concept. It's not new or cool, but it really over the last handful of years, it's a topic that a lot of people have talked about. Not a lot of people have really understood it, and certainly not a lot of people have deployed it because it's different. But the concept is really around saying that I'm going to put some conditions in place, and that as the conditions change, then I may or may not get access to things. So I think that falls neatly in line with this evolving landscape of technology. So as how we access where the data is and where I am, and the conditions, and even getting down to things like time of day or geolocation, those sorts of conditions we can put into place. And so I think that becomes important. I think it may require scraping off, the title zero trust and just using the concepts from zero trust to implement, security technologies and security concepts that move with the data and with the users and with the devices. I think that's where we're heading at some stage, and I think it'll be really interesting to see. And we're seeing people start to do that now, where we've seen people talk about it, myself included. I mean, I've given
Mhm.
zero trust talks for years, but I haven't worked with many people who have actually deployed zero trust. I think we're on the cusp of that happening.
Yeah, yeah. I think 23 is going to be a fascinating year to watch that. Brent, I want to come back to something that you mentioned because it struck me as really interesting because I'm a former coder. I grew up coding, and I've never met a coder that thinks anybody else can code as well as they can. Right? I'm the best. Right? You got to kind of have that swagger. So this concept of the adaptive coding, AI doing the coding, can they code as good as you?
I would say right now it's in its genesis. Industry leaders like Microsoft, the people who own the open source languages that are developing this would say yes. I would say no. I think it's got a degree of provability ground to go. But it's definitely going to hit. It's definitely going to be the way of the future, right? I think what is going to be realized, and I touched on this in 2023, is platform utilization, giving the coders, the data people, the tool sets which are common across all of the enterprise, which standardize data, security, compliance, code check-in ability, code health, um, and it gives them the ability to code shadow, if you will, with a
Mhm.
degree of trust. And so I know Alan will love that. KVM will love that term. And so, yeah, it's coming. It's not there yet, but there's components of it that are in play right now.
I think that's interesting. I've been reading a lot about, as an author, the AI engines that can generate blog posts or even fuller length manuscripts, and hadn't really thought about the coding side of that. But
Yeah.
if the engine can learn to do prose, I'm sure it can learn to do code as well.
Yeah, I'll give a scenario. I'd love to hear how Alan feels about this in KVM. So companies in 2023, and they started in 2022, started taking their enterprise data sets and they started to monetize them by industry, saying we have a whole bunch of data about cars and car sales, and we're going to go put that up on the internet for public consumption, and we're going to charge a fee for you to access this data. And so permissioning that, accessing that, giving insights into that is definitely a growing trend. And what people are doing is they're creating these groups of these data sets, and the concept is then becomes an oracle. So there's an oracle out there where you go for the feed for all car data in the world. And then you start layering on the predictive analytics around that. And then you start getting crazy insights into that industry going forward. But it also makes people like KVM and Alan crazy because it's all these attack vectors on all their data sets. And now all the data sets across the industry are now known, so the schemas are known. Uh, and so it's an interesting concept for them.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it's always a balance of risk and reward, and I, I I am very focused on security these days, but I'm also a marketer at heart, and I think that the risk is kind of interesting. The risk may be worth bearing to be able to harvest that kind of data. But yeah, absolutely, there is a risk with having that data out there.
Yeah, I'll be the curmudgeon that you guys know I'm going to be, right? So, no, you can't have that data. No, I get it. I mean, I get the use cases. I think a lot of that comes down to, what we see with a lot of other, you know, database types of solutions is as we make that public, we've got to be very careful about what data is there and how accessible that data is.
Yeah.
That's the big thing that I care about there. And so I think it's super that we're moving that direction. I just think we have to be cautious as we do.
To say, add 2 cents here, I think healthcare is the ultimate sort of prover of that, right? If you put all the data together and apply AI to it, I mean, the cure for cancer literally probably is there, but you're sharing everybody's private,
Yeah.
healthcare data. So you got two enormous competing, mutually exclusive objectives, pretty much there. To KVM's point, I mean,
Yeah.
security,
Yeah.
security, and ease of access typically fight each other, right?
Well, and it's that conflict between the two that creates that good creative tension, right? If you've got that and you're thinking about those things as you're putting it out there, you're thinking about the security at the same time. Well,
That's
guys, we are at time. I knew this conversation would flow really quickly. And you all know, because you're avid listeners of Status Go, that we're all about action here. We love to leave our listeners with a call to action. So I'm going to ask each one of you, what are one or two things our listeners should go do tomorrow because they listen to our predictions today? So, Brent, I'm going to tag you first, man.
Yeah, if you did nothing else for your corporation today, I'd say is accelerate your data platform modernization. It is in the past few years been what has made people successful, and it is morphing to become the ultimate differentiator in the marketplace, both from how you make decisions to validate decisions, to your security posture, to how you basically are going to do your business processes.
Excellent. Thanks for that. KVM, how about you?
Yeah. Um, hey, I'm going to stay on this secure service edge theme here, but I'm going to take a little bit of a twist. I think a lot of times we overlook the user experience, the employee experience. And so I would say, look, there's a lot of cool new technology with the secure service edge, but I would really sit down and evaluate um, what kind of user experience are you trying to create? Access to data, seamlessness of that engagement, your visibility to it. And I take a look at that because at the end of the day, we want to secure our data, but we also want to make sure our workers are highly productive. And I think when you look at that, you'll find some hidden treasures in this new technology. I think that you'll find not only are we delighting the IT folks, but we also may be delighting the employees themselves.
And that's really one of the ultimate goals, right? So, John, how about you? What's one or two things our listeners should do tomorrow because they listened to our conversation today?
It's the first time I've heard John not speak.
Okay, sorry guys, I had mute on. I would encourage people to step back and look at the top handful of objectives they have as an organization and look at what their employees and what their customers also, what their primary needs are, and look for ways to do things like unlock the data, like Brent is talking about, so that how those things overlap, and then move forward and move because your competitors are going to be moving. I think next year is going to be a big year.
And Alan, bring us home, man. What's an action or two our listeners should go do tomorrow?
Well, if and I know you've heard this, Jeff, but I'm just going to sound a little bit like a broken record for anybody who's heard me speak in the last year or two. But cybersecurity is really about reducing risks to the business. And so the first thing that I think people need to do, and we see this get overlooked all the time, is they really need to focus on understanding where their data is and how it moves around, and understanding that before they start trying to put up protection strategies and defensive strategies. That's step one in any good cyber program. And that's the first thing that you find when you go to industry leading frameworks like the Center for Internet Security or NIST cybersecurity framework or whatnot. it gets skipped all the time. And I would love to see people take the time on the front end to really look at that. And I think that flows into all the other things that we talked about too.
Yeah.
This is really about data and where it is and how it moves around. And that's really what's important.
Well, and I think those actions from all four of you are a great way for our listeners to start the year. And as we're airing this in January of 2023, I think those are reminders to keep in front of ourselves all year long next year. Guys, I want to thank you for carving out the time. I really appreciate it. I know it's early for those of you on the West Coast, and appreciate that. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jeff. Great being here.
To our listeners, if you want to learn more, be sure to visit InterVision.com. The show notes will provide links and contact information, and the website has a lot of information about the activity that InterVision is taking in this space that we've talked about today. This is Jeff Tunn for Brent, KVM, John, and Alan. Thank you very much for listening.
You've been listening to the Status Go podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes or get more information at intervision.com. If you'd like to contribute to the conversation, find InterVision on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Thank you for listening. Until next time.